Welcome to the Blooming League of Original Podcasts.
Hello and welcome to Talk Musicals to Me, a fun theatre podcast about musicals and their impact on people. My name is Caroline Sheen and I'm here to quiz some of the leading creatives in the entertainment industry about their relationship with musical theatre and how certain musicals may have influenced their lives in ways you may not even expect. From how they first encountered a musical to musicals they may never even have seen, let's dive in and introduce today's guest to open up and talk musicals to me. Now, there's a common saying in the showbiz world that variety is dead. But I would hesitate about that and ask anyone who says that to take a look at the work my next guest produces. From the pantomimes at the Palladium and across the country each Christmas to the recent Sunset Boulevard took London and Broadway by storm via Bedknobs and Broomsticks, Annie, The Little Big Things, Young Frankenstein, Warhorse, Evita, and many more, I think that the brilliant producer Michael Harrison's work is the epitome of the word variety. I first met Michael back in, I think, 2013. And I remember thinking then how this guy was going to be really good news for musical theatre in the UK. We had a great natter about all things musical back then, and I'm really looking forward to doing so again today. Michael, thank you very much for coming on here to talk musicals to me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
I just really remember we were doing a concert at the Birmingham Hippodrome, a fundraiser thing.
I remember it was on the stage, wasn't it? The audience were on the stage and sitting at tables. Very nice, yeah.
It was fabulous. And I remember you took us all out for dinner and I sat next to you and we just jabbered away about musical theatre. And I do remember going, this guy is going to be amazing for what this country can do with musical theatre. And you have proved to be that in the years since and probably in the years before as well. But I was busy having babies and stuff before that. So yeah, I just think it's really exciting, the work you do, the wide, diverse musicals you put on. And I really want to get into asking you loads of questions, but I do have the 10 questions that we are set. So I'm going to start with, how did you first meet musical theatre?
Well, weirdly, I think I met musical theatre via opera and obviously pantomime. You know, children, as we know, go to see pantomime when they're kids. And I did that. And I think that is really how I fell in love with the theatre. And I think there's such a fine line between a great top pantomime and a musical anyway. But the side to all of that was actually a production of Madame Butterfly that came to the Sunderland Empire for one night only, a huge opera company that brought Madame Butterfly to the Northeast. And I was only about 6 or 7. And I knew that my grandfather, who I absolutely loved and who loved the theatre, that he loved opera. So for his birthday in the March of that year, apparently this kind of precocious little 6 or 7-year-old asked to take his grandfather to see Madame Butterfly, which the family thought was quite extraordinary. And all I can remember really about that night, I can remember sitting in the upper circle, very, very high up in the theatre, buying the programme, and the programme was entirely in Italian, which my grandfather thought was a rip-off to the people of Sunderland. It's actually quite strange, having this year been involved with the new Miss Saigon, to think back 40 years ago, going to see a production of Madame Butterfly and then seeing pantomime at Christmas, which inevitably means you then go to see musicals because, you know, it's like the old producerial thing. If you go to the theatre, you see a show, there's a poster up for what's coming next. If you've enjoyed it, then you might go and see something else. And that musical was Kiss Me Kate, starring Kate O'Mara, James Smiley. It came out of Plymouth, directed by Roger Redfern, produced by Paul Elliott, who ultimately became a great champion of my career and somebody very important in my life. So it was kind of those three things around the time: pantomime, Madame Butterfly, and seeing Kiss Me Kate. And I love Kiss Me Kate so much. Again, I went with my grandfather and we sat in the back of the gallery. You know, we couldn't afford tickets down in the stalls, but we loved it so much we went back the following week and managed to get tickets down in the stalls. And that kind of began the love affair. And it was the time that, as a kid growing up in the Northeast, great things were coming to Newcastle Theatre Royal. Anthony Newley came in Scrooge. Julia Mackenzie, Dennis Quilley and Alan Armstrong came in the National's Sweeney Todd. So you could really fall in love with musicals, but actually not just have to listen to them on your cassette, as we used to do then, but you could actually go and see them because they'd come to the city. And that was really exciting for me.
That's fantastic. I mean, the idea that, we were talking about the variety of your career, and it started with opera, pantomime, and a musical that is very Broadway, but also very Shakespeare as well. You're like crossing so many boxes off there, aren't you, with the experience that you're getting?
And that's what I did as a kid. I kind of went to see everything. So, yes, we're talking about musicals today, but I also remember the RSC came with a great play called The Herbal Bed. I mean, I was kind of 13 then. Rope from Chichester came out on tour. Ian Richardson in The Magistrate. Patricia Routledge in The Rivals. There were great things that would come alongside the musicals. And it didn't become about just going to see the musicals. It became about just going to the theatre. The D'Oyly Carte came with HMS Pinafore. They came with The Pirates of Penzance. And I think that really helps you in your love of musical theatre by being able to see, a wide breadth of other things. Northern Ballet did Dracula, long before people were taking those kind of shows and stepping away from the Nutcrackers and the Swan Lakes. So it was a great kind of theatrical education for me.
That sounds like a similar time to when I was in college. I saw Patricia Routledge doing The Rivals. Am I right in thinking the RSC used to have a kind of, not a base in Newcastle, but that was one of their kind of big things. They would always take something to Newcastle every year.
It was the third home. So after Stratford and the Barbican, they came to Newcastle and they took over the city. All of the main work from the main house would go to the Theatre Royal. The Swan work would go to the Playhouse. The other place would be at the Gulbenkian. I mean, I saw Alec McCowan in The Tempest, Des Barrett in A Midsummer Night's Dream.
I loved that production.
Robert Stevens in King Lear. It was a great way to learn about just the theatre in general. I think sometimes those of us in musical theatre, we get, whether you're an actor or you're a producer, you can get kind of put in a box. But actually, knowing as much about what's going on in the rest of the theatrical landscape is as important as knowing what's going on in musicals. And I think that's why I've always had quite a broad mind and a range of taste that spreads beyond just musical theatre, although I obviously predominantly now produce musicals.
I love the idea that you took your grandfather to the opera, and the fact that pantomime is such a huge part of your life, and that pantomime is for all ages. And it is just wonderful seeing families at the theatre, seeing all the generations there. And I've just come back from New York, and I had a bit of a sort of gathering of people because I've worked out in America, and a few people turned up that I'd worked with there, and a few people turned up that I was in New York the same time as. And I was saying, I did pantomime with my friend Chloe, who's out there doing Hamilton now. And my friend Q, who is American, she looked very confused and started doing, what? You mean this? And she was sort of doing mime. And I said, no, that's not what pantomime is. So then we were trying to explain pantomime. It's such a British thing. I find it bizarre that it hasn't crossed the pond, because I feel like the Americans would love it.
Well, it's funny, the amount of Americans that now come to the Palladium.
Oh, I bet.
I've been shocked when, great directors like Bart Sher would come up to me and say, I've just been to see the Palladium pantomime, it's fantastic. And watching Jerry Mitchell jump out of his seat and give a standing ovation and applaud. And, this year, not so many Americans that came over that would message me and say, yeah, I just love it. Lots of people say to me, why doesn't it go to America? I'm very happy that we just keep it here. I don't want them to have it. There's very few things that are ours. This is one of them. So we'll keep it firmly on our aisles, I think.
We'll keep it special.
Yeah.
So, Michael, my next question. What was the first musical you were personally involved with?
Well, like most kids, I was in the amateurs, and we had some great amateur societies where I lived in around the coast in Whitley Bay and Tynemouth, and I was a member of a few of them. And when I was 17, I played the MC in Cabaret, which I absolutely loved playing. At the same time, I played Mr. Sowerbury and Oliver, and they were kind of, just kind of at that age, not quite in your 20s, having not gone off to university to be performing in those. But I was never destined to be a performer, but I enjoyed it at the time and doing that. When I first came to London, I worked in the office of the brilliant producer David Pugh, who gave me a job straight away, and I went in for a meeting with him, and within 10 minutes I got a job. I was working at Ticketmaster, pulled the Ticketmaster tag from around my neck off and threw it in the bin and said, "You're not going back there," and kind of thus began my producing career. He was producing a lot of the time. He had art in the West End. The play What I Wrote, the Morecambe and Wise play by Sean Foley and Hamish McColl, was a huge hit in London. That was going to New York. And David always gave me one piece of advice as a producer. He said, you always need the management tour. You need the show that's just going to keep going for you across the year, that allows you to take risks in other areas. And if you think about it, a lot of the great producers had shows like that. You know, when people would talk about Bill Kenwright, they would always say Bill's office was built upon Joseph and Blood Brothers. And at the time, Paul Elliott's was based on Pantomime and Buddy. And David's office at the time would survive on the Blues Brothers.
Oh, right, okay.
The Blues Brothers played the West End many, many times, went out on the road, and I was kind of an associate general manager on that. That was kind of my first time within a producing office working on something that, you know, wasn't a play, did require sound, did require a lighting rig, did require musicians, and sort of started teaching me the difference between how you produced a play and a musical, because obviously it sounds obvious, but they're so different. But the first musical that I produced was quite an interesting story. It's amazing when you look back on your life and how things are being planned out for you. My accountant had an office at the end of a building in Leicester Square where Spotlight is. It was on a different floor and he was at the end. And on the way along, there was lots of little offices where producers would rent out. And I would go in every week and walk down the corridor to take my accounts, to do my numbers with my accountant. And one of the producers in the offices there was Kenny Wax, who weirdly now today is on the other side of this wall in his office. But then he had a little cubicle in this corridor, as I say, and I'd walk past every day and I'd smile, and then sometimes he'd smile back, and then eventually the smile turned to hello, then eventually the hello turned to, oh, come in, sit down and have a chat. What are you up to and what are you doing? And Kenny said to me one day, what do you want to do next? And I said, well, I really want to produce a musical. He said, yes, so do I. He'd not produced a musical for a long, long time. And he said, wouldn't it be great to produce something by Andrew Lloyd Webber on the road? And I said, yeah, that would be fantastic. But I'm not going to get anything from Andrew Lloyd Webber. You know, I was like late 20s or something. And he said, well, we could go and ask. So we organised a meeting with Andrew's chief executive at the time, Andre Paczynski, and we went in and we said, we'd like to produce an Andrew Lloyd Webber musical on tour. You know, we were quite kind of confident, I guess. And he said, oh, well, what do you want to do? And you can't have the Phantom of the Opera. You know, that's produced by Cameron Mackintosh. And we, oh, no, we couldn't do that one. Right? But you can't have Cats, because that's also produced by Cameron Mackintosh. And anyway, David Ian's doing the tour. And he went right down the list of Andrew Lloyd Webber shows. And I said, I think, well, what's happening with Aspects of Love? And he went, you don't want to do Aspects of Love. And we looked at it. And Kenny looked at me and I, love changes everything. That's a big song. Could we go and experiment and see if we could cast it and put it together? So we went away and we managed to convince David Essex to play George, which we thought was a coup, given he'd been the original Che in Evita for Andrew. And that was kind of Andrew and David coming back together. Nikolai Foster had just had quite a big success at the Crucible in Sheffield. And we thought, oh, he's the new feature of directing musicals. We'll grab him, Rob Jones to design it. And we put this tour together. And the combination of David Essex and Aspects of Love was huge.
Yeah.
And we had a great cast, you know.
Do you have Matt Rawle?
Matt Rawle was Alex.
Yes.
Shona Lindsay, Poppy Tierney, James Graham, who eventually took over from David. It was beautiful. And off it went on the road. And that was the first musical that I ever produced. And it was very strange that all those years later, my life comes back to Andrew. But actually, that is how it started. It was like laying the foundations. The tag to that story is that Cameron found out about it and came to see it in Bath. And Cameron said, well, you've taken a kind of flop of Andrew's and made a success of it. Do you want to have a look at one of mine? And we went, yeah. What you got? He said, do you like The Witches of Eastwick? And I said, oh, I love the score of The Witches of Eastwick. I thought you'd like this story, Caroline. So we get Nikolai again and we try and do the same thing. And at the time, you know, Marty Pellow was really hot. He seemed the obvious Darrell Van Horn to me. And off we went and we did the same thing. We took a title that hadn't really worked properly the first time round, took it on the road, big star, and it did incredibly well. So Tim Rice comes to me after that and says, I'm seeing what you've done with Aspects of Love and The Witches of Eastwick. Don't suppose you like the score to Chess, do you? I said, I love the score to Chess. Kenny went, I'm out now. I've done it. Kenny only went on to do something called Six.
Yeah, that little show.
So he wasn't missing out on anything there. But the great thing about that was, and how all these things lead to the next thing, was I did Chess and I did it on my own. I'd always had Kenny there as a partner, but Chess was then the first one that I did on my own. But it was great that by my kind of mid-30s, I'd worked with Andrew, Cameron and Tim on 3 musicals, but it didn't come with the pressure of the West End. They were for the road, and it was a great learning curve. And I just feel as though kind of set me up for, thankfully today, I obviously still have very, very close relationships with all 3 of them, between, Andrew on everything that we're doing, Tim on Evita and Joseph and Superstar, and obviously Cameron on Saigon. So funny how life has a way of working out, doesn't it?
I love that story. And they're 3 of my favourite shows. Chess was the first show I ever saw in London. And literally my next trip to London, I saw Aspects of Love. And it's just totally my era. Obviously, Witches of Eastwick was a massive deal to me, having been in that first cast in London.
I remember getting on the bus overnight from Newcastle. You could get the 11 o'clock bus, arrive in London at 6 o'clock in the morning, wander around London, see a matinee, see the evening show, which I did, and it was The Witches of Eastwick, and get the 11 o'clock bus home, which meant you could see 2 West End shows, be away for 2 nights, and never need a hotel.
That's amazing. How often did you do that?
I did it quite a bit. I remember doing it for Witches. I remember seeing Les Mis and Petula Clark in Sunset Boulevard. I remember seeing Spend, and The Lion King, all on these kind of trips. And it was fantastic. I didn't care. I was young. I'd sleep on the coach.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it now, but it was exciting.
That's a really similar thing to me, except I think probably because Wales is a bit closer than Newcastle, the overnight thing didn't happen. So we would have to get a hotel. If I'd lived in Newcastle, I'd have been on that bus with you. That's amazing. I'm loving these stories. So here we go. Apart from the shows you have produced, which is the musical you have seen the most? Are you a fanboy of any musicals out there?
By far, The Phantom of the Opera.
Really?
I'll tell you why. Again, goes back to my grandfather. He took me to Canada. We had family in Canada, and he took me to Toronto. His family lived outside of Toronto in a little place called Dundas, but you would make the trip into Toronto. And he took me for a couple of nights. And again, this is really strange how things happen. And, the Toronto theatre scene's great. They've got great theatres there. And we saw Miss Saigon in a theatre, Princess of Wales, that was built for Miss Saigon. The irony of that, all these years later, now producing the new Miss Saigon, we saw Crazy for You in the Royal Alex. The irony of that, having now worked with Susan Stroman twice, who's become a very, very close friend, and having produced Crazy for You, the last revival with Charlie Stemp in London. And the third was The Phantom of the Opera, which we saw from the back row of the gallery. And there's one circle in the theatre, which was the Pantages, now the Ed Mirvish, from the very, very back row, and seeing this show. And I think I couldn't quite believe what it was. I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing in the staging of it, even then. And I became obsessed with it, so much so that, of course, I saw it in London thereafter. But then when I was at university in Edinburgh, I took a job at the Playhouse the season that Phantom was on as an usher, just to watch The Phantom of the Opera. I was the worst usher the world has ever known. I used to hide my programs. So I didn't have to sell them. I was terrible if there was a fire evacuation. But what I could do is watch Phantom 8 times a week. And I did. I was completely obsessed with it. So much so that I could probably deliver you a one-man version of the entire show, including playing both Andre and Furman and singing notes. I adored it. And I think I must have seen it 50 times. And I actually pop back. I still now go because I think it's the kind of show that inspires you in so many ways. It's one of the great meetings of when a book, music and lyrics and a design and the director's vision all come together as one. I mean, it really is. I think if you saw it in any other format, it perhaps might not work quite the same. I know there have been other productions, but when you go and you sit in that theatre and you see what they were all doing, what Gilly was doing with the choreography and Hal's direction, Maria's design with Andrew's music, and, those performances, that central love triangle. I think it's pretty special and I love it. I take people, if you fancy a night, do you want to go and see Phantom? Oh, and it's funny, everybody wants to. Everybody wants to go and see it. It's never people say, oh, no, thanks, I won't bother. I love it. Just before we were doing Evita, Jamie Lloyd and I went to see it, and we just, we had a night out. We just went and watched it and thoroughly enjoyed it. So I love the Phantom of the Opera.
I find it really interesting that you saw it in Canada first, because it was a huge deal in Canada. When I toured with Poppins in America, there were quite a lot of Canadians in the tour with me. And I feel like Phantom was a sort of seminal moment in their theatrical history. I think maybe they got it first before Broadway or very close to it opening. And I think it was a really, really big cultural shift in Canada towards like big musical theatre stuff happening.
It was, and right across North America. I mean, when they talk about kind of the British invasion of what Andrew and Cameron did at that time, of course, for the theatres on the road to house Phantom, they had to be refurbished. They had to, the stage houses, the grids, they all needed work because they were going to get what you got on Broadway, and they did. Crashing chandeliers, candelabras, floating boats, big staircases, the lot. So I think it means an awful lot to the American road today about what Phantom did. And I've watched news clips and things of Phantom going to New York at the time, and this would have had the knock-on effect of what happened in Canada. I mean, it was major news. It was the equivalent of us sitting down watching the 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock news, and the newscaster saying, a musical is about to open on Broadway. You cannot get tickets for 3 years. It is completely sold out. It was this huge thing. And I think, it's a great piece of producing, isn't it? Because it was a risk. I mean, all theatres are risk, but that show then, first of all, it had the word opera in the title, which some might say is not a great idea for a musical. We would do focus groups today and people would say, oh no, we've done a survey and that's very confusing. You can't call it that. That is what would happen. Social media tells us that that's the wrong thing. And it is very operatic. It's very, very operatic at the beginning when they're in the opera house. And, what are the audience coming to see? Grotesque. It was kind of horror, which traditionally hadn't worked in the musical theatre. It was hugely expensive. It was a huge orchestra. It was not going to be cheap to run. And I always say, and I say this to Cameron, I said, God, if you were going down, you were going down big. But they were just producing what they thought was the best version of the show that they possibly could. Look, they've all reaped the awards of it many, many times over. But I just think it's a great piece of work. I think, the structure that Andrew gave it and that score, it's spine-tingling still.
Oh, it is. I find that really interesting what you say about how the demand for it made the theatres across North America improve their infrastructure, I guess, and how that would benefit the future productions going there. Yeah, I guess maybe because I don't think with a producer's brain, because I sort of see where, the roles went from there and the performances and all that. But with a producer's brain on, you go, okay, so now I can use that theatre for another big show. And that then becomes a much more lucrative path for people to take, I guess.
One of the great things when a show is just more than a show. I was walking down 44th Street past the Majestic when Phantom was on a couple of years ago. And there was 4 quite young girls. I don't actually know what language they were speaking in. I didn't understand it, but they were having a row. It was a very heated row, and they were clearly having a row about what show they were going to see, because somebody was pointing in this direction, somebody was pointing in that direction, and they were looking about, what it's like in New York when you queue for those day seats and the queues get quite big, and they were rowing about. My interpretation was, well, I want to go and see that, and the other one's going, well, I want to go and see that, and somebody saying, well, what's that? Well, you know what that one is. And they go, no, I don't. Well, you do know what that one is. I don't know what that show is. And the other girl just went, da 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 da. They went, oh yeah, and they walked and joined the queue for Phantom, and I thought that was brilliant. That those chords meant something. Maybe the name didn't.
It surpasses language.
It surpassed the language, and it even makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It's terrific that music gets out there in that way, and that is only what musicals can do.
Yeah. Oh, I love your passion for this. I'm seeing a Phantom of the Opera production in the future, but maybe once Cameron has let go of it. I don't know if he ever will.
I'm staying well away. That one can't be bettered.
So my next question is, Which musical has made you laugh the most and which has made you cry the most?
Well, it took me quite a long time to get to New York, actually, in terms of my age. I can't remember actually, probably my early 20s. But I was lucky because on the very first time that I landed in New York, on the very first day, I saw The Producers with Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick.
Oh,
And I saw
wow.
Hairspray with Harvey. So it was quite a great introduction to Broadway theatre. But I think sitting in the St. James Theatre, seeing my first ever Broadway show, which funny enough is the theatre that I produced my first Broadway show in when we did Sunset Boulevard, another weird thing that happens in life. You know, I think as a Brit, we did grow up on the Lloyd Webber, Booble and Schomburg epic kind of sweeping shows. And apart from maybe A Crazy for You coming here, or if we're seeing the kind of Rodgers and Hammerstein thing, but the shows that we were seeing of the day were more in that sweeping operatic world. So to go and see a musical comedy, I mean, I'd seen 42nd Street and things, but nothing was quite the same as the book that Mel and Tom Meehan had created for The Producers. And I just remember thinking it was extraordinary about how funny it was that, yes, it was a musical, but it had all of these laughs in it. And I don't think I'm a very good person to show emotion in the theatre. I don't think I laugh out loud a lot, but I certainly laughed out loud at Nathan and Matthew and the wonderful Gary Beach who played Roger Debris. I mean, I remember that whole sequence was just absolutely sublime and, you know, showed the incredibly gifted director that Stroh is. Crying, I had to think quite hard about this because, I mean, you'll think I'm terrible, but the first time I cried was when the chandelier lifted in Phantom because I found that, one, a surprise I didn't know and just so theatrical. So I cried through theatricality rather than that kind of emotion from the story.
Overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, I was overwhelmed by that. I will just reference a musical that I was involved in here when I did cry, because I cried in the rehearsal room at the first run through of a show I did called The Little Big Things. I just lost it in front of the entire cast and everybody that was in the company because I found it so beautiful. I think the fact that it was Henry Fraser's own very, very true story, I found it incredibly moving. And I remember absolutely sobbing, both at the run through and at several performances throughout the run. And that's kind of rare. It's just a hard thing to say when it's a show that you were involved with. So maybe you're kind of closer to it. But that story really did move me. And seeing his family there and seeing him and seeing what it meant to them, that was actually quite a special thing.
I think there's something about a musical that is based on real life and that real life being so recent and actually so present. I think you're seeing the humans that you're portraying on the stage. And I find that with Come From Away as well, you know, that these are real people and you know they're real people because they're there. Whereas I guess things with Evita and stuff like that feels so historic and feels almost like fiction. I know it's not fiction, but I think that closeness to the reality and that reality being so moving and so much about humans being good people, which we need so much today, don't we? I think that is an incredibly moving story. And then The Producers as well. What a great first couple of shows in New York. Hello, Producers and Hairspray.
It was fantastic. And then I think the next day I found myself sitting in Studio 54 watching Sam Mendes' brilliant production of Cabaret. So, you know, it hasn't always been like that on trips to New York, but for a first go, it was pretty special.
That's pretty golden, isn't it? When we were doing Witches of Eastwick at Drury Lane, there was a big buzz around the building because Mel Brooks came to watch it. And when Cameron produced that, it was kind of the first musical comedy for a long time. I think maybe since Me and My Girl in the West End, that was, you know, such a broad musical comedy. And Mel Brooks came to see it with Anne Bancroft was his wife, I think.
Yeah.
And we met him at Stage Door and I was like, wow, this is really cool.
All those links going into the St. James, then doing Sunset there many years later, watching The Producers, working with Stroh, and of course working with Mel, because I remember one morning sitting in Stroh's apartment and around the table there was myself, Susan Stroman, well actually she was at the kitchen making bagels, Mel Brooks, Tom Meehan and Glenn Kelly. And I produced Annie and there's Tom, who, you know, written the book to Annie. Susan Stroman's got some smoked salmon on a knife with a bagel. Mel Brooks is sitting next to me drinking coffee. And Mel goes to me, so how the hell do I end up having breakfast with Michael Harrison? And I went, no, how the hell do I end up having breakfast and bagels with Mel Brooks? I mean, it was kind of the weirdest moment of all time. But that's the great thing about such a small world, isn't it? And like anything can happen. I'm a kid from Newcastle who, as I've said a few times in this, could only afford to sit in the gallery to watch these shows. And then suddenly you find yourself on Broadway or working with a great like Mel or Andrew or Stroh. It's the magic of what the musical theatre can do.
I think it's also what you bring to it as well, though, Michael, because having met you a few times and worked with you on little bits and bobs, the passion that you have for it, that I think anyone listening can hear, is so focused. And I don't think there was any world where you weren't going to do what you're doing. And I love that it's taken you where it's taken you. I think that's so exciting and hopefully inspirational to people out there who go, oh, maybe I could give that a go.
Really lovely for you to say, but I think the thing about being a producer, especially today, or maybe it's always been like this, but it just feels like it today, is it is really, really hard. It's really hard for anybody to take an idea, be it a new show, a revival, it doesn't matter really. And getting it from the idea of doing it to the stage is difficult. Making a success of it is then something else. And you've got to love it and be passionate about it, because every day there's too many reasons to give up. There's a lot of producers. I love producers. I talk to producers all the time because they're the only people that I've got anything in common with. They know things that are going on in my head that, nobody else would know, because we all feel and experience the same things. And it's really difficult. So if you get out of bed in the morning, you've got to want to do it. I always say, I call it walking over the bridge. When I walk over the bridge from Waterloo, I got to walk over that bridge and love the show that I'm working on. Whether other people love it or not, I can't help that, but I've got to love it, because if you don't love it, then you can't produce it. And it all has to come from passion. It can't come from ego. It can't come from wanting success. It can't come from wanting financial gain. It just has to be the passion to do it. Otherwise, you probably fail.
Yeah.
And if you do fail, but you've had the passion, then that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the thing. That's why I find so interesting that the big successful producers have all that in common, is this drive and this focus and this absolute passion. It isn't about bums on seats. It is about bums on seats in order that, something keeps going, but it's about doing something good to get bums on seats.
Andrew and Cameron, two people who are approaching their 80s. I've never met two more passionate people. You can't run away from the fact of why they are who they are because of the passion. The passion for the theatres, for the buildings, for the shows, for new things, for old things. I find it absolutely extraordinary that your mind, having done everything that you've done and achieved everything that you've done, to be going into your 80th year and you're still as hungry and as keen for it as ever. I think that's magic.
I've worked with Cameron a lot. I've never actually met Andrew Lloyd Webber, but I've read his autobiography, and that's what screams off the page, is this utter obsession with the theatre and music. And it's just fascinating to read. And you get that from Cameron as well, obviously. And I just did the 40th anniversary sort of gala that they did. And it's the first time I've sort of been in a building with them for a while. And I was like, nothing's changed. It's exactly the same. It's like childish enthusiasm that they have, the playfulness.
I think that gives you the longevity as well. I think it allows you to keep reinventing yourself, reinventing the shows, which can only be a good thing for everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. So my last question of our first act, as it were, is a confession question. It's a terrible thing, really. I've never seen a professional production of West Side Story. Is there a musical out there that you haven't seen that you are ashamed of?
Well, I've had to think long and hard about this, because what I realise is that I've seen an awful lot. So I've seen, multiple professional productions of West Side Story and of Gypsy and of Guys and Dolls and of all the kind of great classics. But if the question is there any musical you regret not seeing?
Yes.
I regret sometimes not seeing shows that didn't work. So I feel as though I arrived in London kind of a little bit later than the time there was that turnover of shows that just didn't quite click. Can you remember there was that time in the kind of late 80s going into the 90s where there were shows that didn't quite work? And when I look back at them, sometimes I think, I hadn't actually arrived, or I was here, and for whatever reason, I just didn't go. And I regret that, because one of the things I've learnt is you learn as much from a flop as you do from a hit. And I don't just mean producing that yourself, but just going to see things that somebody says to me, there's such and such a show on, it's not very good. Well, I'm inclined to want to go and see it even more, because you want to see what isn't working as much as what is working.
Yeah.
So I look back at, I shouldn't name shows, but there were a lot of shows in the 90s that were these things that came, colossal, big, extravagant budgets of shows that came and just went.
I'll name them. The ones that I'm imagining you're thinking of. I don't know.
Yeah.
But they're the ones that were sort of just before my time as well. The things like Time and Metropolis. And then there were things like Lautrec.
Bernadette, Lautrec, Napoleon.
Things like that were all trying to be the new Les Mis, anything French,
Yeah, the Fields of Ambrosia.
Yes.
Where everyone knows you. Which. Yeah, I like that. It's like Christmas time on pantomime. People think I'm mad because I go and see all of the ones that we do. And then I go and see some others as well. And they go, well, why? And I go, because there'll always be something. You might go to the smallest church hall or, a little theatre on a low budget, and something that they do gives you an idea for something else. And I think that's the same with musicals. They're so hard. When somebody gets it wrong, there's no shame in that. They're just hard, and more fail than work. So there's nothing wrong with seeing shows that you can say, well, actually, it was the structure there, or it was the character development there, or it was the misplacing of that number there that didn't quite make it, or the design, for every Phantom of the Opera, where the design is perfectly matched to the material. There are shows, but perhaps visually, they're not quite right. As Andrew always bangs on about Hal Prince's mantra, which is you can't listen to a musical if you can't look at it.
Oh, yeah.
If you think about it, that's often true. The score can be fabulous, but if it's mismatched with what's on stage, then that can be jarring. So I'm not answering that in the direct way of one particular great musical, because I think I've seen a lot, but I do regret not seeing many, many shows that perhaps didn't quite hit the mark.
This is a little extra question, as with your producer experience. How important is the right venue for a new musical or a new musical production?
Cameron said to me, listen, dear, you should pick a theatre like you pick a tie.
Ooh.
And there's a lot to be said about that keep talking about Phantom, but Phantom would not be on today if it was in the Dominion. Being in that auditorium, being in that environment, Cats probably wouldn't have been the success it was if it was in the Adelphi originally. It had to be in what was the New London, in that kind of immersive environment. The combination of the piece and the venue is actually vital.
Sorry, I had to add that question in because I was thinking, when you're saying about if the design isn't right or if this isn't right, I do think there is something about the atmosphere of a theatre needing to suit play or the show as well. Really interesting. I'm going to lead on to a little break now and come back with Act 2 after the interval. So on Talk Musicals to Me, I thought I would use this opportunity to support some friends of mine who have small businesses. And I put a message out on my social media to see who would get in touch and to see how I can help them amplify their voices. So I have a couple of ones that I would like to mention today. So this one is from my friend John Chartres, who runs a small business specialising in accounting for the arts, self-employed actors, musicians and stage management, as well as small production companies. Friendly advice and good value for anyone who wants to get in touch at fresheyesfinance.co.uk. And this is from a dear mummy pal of mine called Lucy McCrudden, who runs a non-profit called Dance Mama, which is dedicated to supporting parents who dance on and off stage. With evidence-based information and support, plus over 80+ stories, we help parents continue their careers in dance from a physical, mental, creative and logistical viewpoint. Check out www.dancemama.org to see how they can help you navigate your career as a parent. And finally, Jessica runs something that sounds like great fun, a thing called Showtime Circus, which can be found at Showtime_circus on Instagram. It's a circus school franchise and helps other small business owners franchise or license their business. It's based in Birmingham, but I think there's lots of them around the country. So get online and have a look if you want to learn some circus skills. Hello and welcome back to the second act of Talk Musicals to Me with incredible theatre producer Michael Harrison. Michael, let's crack on with our first question of Act 2. Which musical would you put on the school curriculum?
This is quite a hard question, actually, because, well, actually, it's quite a funny question because when I did my GCSEs, when you sit in your line in the exam hall, everybody's in a line and everybody's up and down, everybody's at their tables. And we all opened our exam paper, tearing the seal off the top. And our English literature GCSE was for a play or musical you have seen, please. And it went into something about the impact that it's had on your life. And everybody turned around and looked at me because I was the only one seeing plays or musicals, which was probably telling of the school that I was at. Obviously, everybody has to study Shakespeare. And this is kind of something that we're talking about here in my office at the moment, because kids have to study Shakespeare on the curriculum and they don't understand it. It's really, really hard. I'm not even sure as an adult I understand every word of every Shakespearean play, but they have to study it and they have to write about it. And of course, Kiss Me Kate is from The Taming of the Shrew. West Side Story is from Romeo and Juliet. So there are musicals that can help you at least understand the basics of what Shakespeare is. And we're doing that at the moment, actually. We're doing a big education project. Juliet Stevenson did an article that I read in the Sunday Times saying how she goes around schools and she talks to kids about Shakespeare and they sort of kind of quite get A Midsummer Night's Dream, but they don't understand the Scottish play. So we're doing a big education project at the moment where we're workshopping a musical, but we're doing it for kids in the Northeast. So we're putting it on the main stage at Newcastle Theatre Royal, and we've given all the tickets away to 5,000 Newcastle school kids to come along, and it's basically the Scottish play told through a pop score. Our ambition is that at the end of it, the kids will at least understand more about the play by having watched this musical. So I can't think of one that I could think would be a good enough reason to take off a literary classic like An Inspector Calls or Shakespeare. But I think musicals that inform Shakespeare can actually be really helpful.
Oh, absolutely. It's such a good way in, isn't it? West Side Story, Kiss Me Kate. I think there's another one, like the Comedy of Errors one, Boys from Syracuse.
That's right, yeah.
I know it's far less well known. And that's why so many movies are based on it as well, like 10 Things I Hate About You. And I remember loved that film. That's based on Taming of the Shrew as well.
Oh, yeah, that's happening. Good producer friend of mine, Mike Bosner's about to do that. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, I think they can be really helpful in that way. The great classic American musicals like A Gypsy, like Guys and Dolls, like A West Side Story, obviously, most of the work of Sondheim, they could be on the curriculum, but I'm not sure they necessarily need to be. I just think that musicals can inform us in so many ways. And certainly if I saw West Side Story, I could tell you more about Romeo and Juliet than I could if I didn't see West Side Story. Dueling households, rival gangs, Tony and Maria, Romeo and Juliet. It all works and it's all much clearer. That's what we're trying to do with Weird, and let kids come to the theatre for free. And it's only 5,000 of them, but it's a start. And hopefully that will mean that we learn about our musical and they'll do better in their exams because they'll be able to write about the Scottish play in a way that they wouldn't if they just had to read that, very, very dense dialogue.
Studying something is far different from viewing it or performing it. And Shakespeare was written to be performed and watched, not some people sitting there. And that's what theatre is, isn't it?
Yes.
I know there's so much you can get from studying his language and the meter and the rhythm and themes of every play and the universality of everything that he wrote, which is amazing. But actually, deep down, it was written to be put on a stage, lit and costumed and, well, maybe candles and all that. It's just so hard, isn't it, for kids, because it is such an inaccessible way of speaking now and listening to all that. Like you say, you have to filter it. It's almost like doing a translation, isn't it, in French or German. You find the words that you understand and you work out a way of making it make sense and go, well, I think that's what it means. Whereas if you see a brilliant actor on stage doing Hamlet or something, you go, oh, you hopefully follow it pretty well.
Absolutely.
Obviously, you're talking about the Northeast so much. It feels to me like you've just opened Miss Saigon up there, a huge new production of it. You're doing Weird up there. It feels to me like you're really giving back to that area that inspired you to do what you do and like brought, like you say, this huge wide scope of theatre to your doorstep. How important is that to you, and how do you think that's going? Is it very different? Is your theatre going experience as a kid something kids up there can still access?
Well, I love the place. I love where I'm from. I've never forgotten about it. I've never tried to lose the accent. Maybe it's not as heavy as some Geordies, but I've never tried to shake off where I'm from. I love the building. I love that theatre. I mean, Ian McKellen calls it the greatest theatre in the world, or certainly it's his favourite theatre in the world. And I know many other performers feel the same. There's a magic in that theatre. Somebody once said to me, there's only one. And I went, what? I mean, there's only one Newcastle Theatre Royal. And I kept thinking, well, there's not, because, there's lots of similar theatres around the country, but I actually know what they mean. There's something about when you sit in the circle and how the boxers come in and join up to the proscenium march without a gap, and it's still got a raked stage, and many theatres have, anti-rakes have gone in over the years, so the way the stage tips one way and the stalls tip another, and it's that perfect meeting of the audience and the actor. Growing up, Newcastle isn't Manchester, it's not Birmingham, it's not a big theatre, it's 1,200 seats, it doesn't have a big proscenium arch. There's still shows that can't go there. It never had Wicked, it never had Billy Elliot. That's its own story. And Cameron definitely has made a big effort to get his shows in there by a bit of adaptation. So, the last Oliver went there, Mary Poppins went there, Les Mis went there. I just like it. I'm not trying to do it for any kind of cause. I love going to Manchester. I love opening a show in Manchester. Very, very fond of the Opera House. There's the Palace and the Opera House there. I've got a soft spot for the Opera House for a reason, again, that I don't know. I don't know what it is. I just like that building. There's great theatres in Edinburgh, in Birmingham. I love the Mayflower in Southampton. But I like taking creative teams to my home city. I like them experiencing the nightlife, the restaurants. The food scene up there is wonderful. And that means a lot to people who are there for a long time, that you can have a life outside the four walls of the theatre. I like the audience there. I don't think they're a pushover. They don't just stand in Newcastle. It's really hard to get them to stand, and they don't just laugh either. If you've got a comedy, you've really got to be funny to make them laugh. So I find them a very useful audience in that way.
Quite a good litmus test, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, I often wonder if that's got anything to do with that history of the Royal Shakespeare Company, that they went for so long, that people are very in tune with the theatre. It's a very loyal audience. We've had a great experience there with Miss Saigon, but I had a great experience there when I took Susan Stroman and Mel Brooks to open Young Frankenstein. And Mel Brooks was in Newcastle for a month. That was amazing for a little Geordie boy.
Yeah.
When he walked in on that first preview and the whole audience stood and applauded, it was one of the great moments of my life. We opened chess there, so Tim came up, Aspects of Love, Andrew came up. Obviously, I've just had both Bubel and Schomburg and Cameron there for Miss Saigon. I sound like I work for the Newcastle Tourist Board here as I'm speaking.
But it's like you're hosting them, isn't it? It's your hood.
Yeah, well, it is. But what I love is they all come up and have a jolly good time, and they all like it. And I think it's a safe city. And we're going to open the new Cats after Regent's Park. We're going to go and do that in Plymouth. And I enjoy going down there. It's just, different shows start in different places. When we eventually tour Titanic, I'd like that to open in Newcastle, because that theatre smells right for that show in terms of its scale. So not everything, but where I can. It's why I've done the pantomime for 20 years. It's why I find myself still going back, because it's something that has become quite an important thing for the city. It's 100,000 people.
And it's home.
And it's home. Yeah, at the end of the day, I love London, and London is my home, but you go home to Newcastle.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same about Wales. And now that Cardiff has the Millennium Centre, that just blows my mind, because now I'm like, you can come to my home and see a really good show in a fabulous theatre, because that wasn't the case when I was growing up. We had to go to the Hippodrome in Birmingham to see anything. So yeah, that's something I'm super proud of. It's nice, isn't it, to have such a theatrical base outside of London as well.
Marianne, who's the wonderful manager of the Theatre Royal, the public will say to me, when did you buy the Theatre Royal? And I go, oh, no, I don't know. It's not. I'm just like any other producer going there, but they think it's mine. I go, I'd like it to be, but it's definitely not.
Oh, that's amazing. Is it a Frank Matcham theatre?
It is. It is a Matcham, not a pillar in sight. Continental seating, no centre aisle. It's terrific. I was there only the other night, sitting in row E of the Grand Circle, and it's great for comedy, but it's great for anything, actually. It's just one of those special spaces.
Now, guiltily, like I haven't seen West Side Story, I've not been to Newcastle Theatre Royal.
I have to remedy that.
But you are selling it to me, Michael. That's next on my list of places to go. Michael, which forgotten musical would you like to see remounted?
Well, I'd like to see this musical remounted, like most shows that have kind of been forgotten. They probably need something doing to them because there's probably a reason why. But I love the score to Stop the World I Want to Get Off. I think it's a sublime score. And I also love the score to its companion piece, which is The Row of the Grease Paint, The Smell of the Crowd. And I was lucky enough to know Leslie Bricusse. And we talked quite a bit about, I was a big Anthony Newley fan. I saw him in Scrooge as a boy, and I thought he was a great entertainer. And I just thought the songs that they wrote for particularly Stop the World, but many, many classics in Grease Paint. I mean, it's a great story about Leslie used to try and write every day. And Leslie took his wife Evie shopping, and she said to him, "Are you coming in?" He said, "No, I'll just sit in the car." And he was sitting in the car, and the sun was shining, and he had a piece of paper, and he thought, "I'll try and write a song." He thought, "It's quite a good day today.
You're not going to tell me that's when he wrote that song.
I feel quite good today. I feel good, feeling good." Oh, look at the lovely sky, and the bird flies past, and he can't quite think of what the lyric would be, but he had a tune. Bum, ba-dum, ba-dum. And he wrote Feeling Good.
In the car.
In the car. I mean, that was Leslie's genius. These big songs. I remember that great show that they did at the Other Palace a few years ago, Pure Imagination, which was Leslie's songbook. And I remember this guy sitting a little further along from me. Every time a song came on, he was kind of in awe. He went, he wrote that, and he wrote that, and he wrote that.
It's vast.
I wanted to do Stop the World. I thought Stop the World was a great idea for Charlie Stemp. I wanted to take the score, the best songs from Stop the World and the best songs from The Row of the Grease Paint and bring them together for one new show. It never happened, but it's one of those things that you can dream about because it's, Gonna Build a Mountain, Who Can I Turn To? Beautiful, beautiful, big, big songs.
My husband Mike did a Friday night as music night that was all Leslie Bricusse stuff. It's astonishing in its variety, again, of music. I think Hannah Waddingham did it, and she sang an incredible song that was the soundtrack song to Superman. So it was actually the Superman soundtrack, but with Leslie Bricusse's lyrics, and it was gorgeous.
He would do that, Leslie. There are many, many Hollywood films, John Williams' work, that you would find that he'd set a lyric to, or he'd written, the music himself. He was a great, great songwriter who would write songs that make the public feel something. Those songs are known by the public.
Yeah. Do you know what he did? I worked with him. Well, I didn't work with him, but he came to the showing. I don't know, you might have been there even. This was about 15 years ago. I did a workshop of a load of Gershwin pieces that Leslie Bricusse had set lyrics to.
That's right, yeah.
I don't know if you came to it, but it was fabulous. I think Jilly was going to potentially do it as a kind of concert with dance and like singers singing the lyrics. And they were great lyrics. And, you're singing Rhapsody in Blue and there are words.
That's right. He did that.
Yeah.
One of my favourite Leslie stories was he called me up and he said, "I'd like to talk to you about a musical that I'd like you to produce." I said, oh, great. And we met for lunch and he arrived and he put on the table, I think it's somewhere here in the office, I've kept it. It's like an old-fashioned leather doctor's bag, which was the bag that Jimmy Needlander gave him on the opening night of Jekyll and Hyde on Broadway. And on one side had the initials JH, Jekyll and Hyde, and on the other side the initials LB. And he said, "I'd like you to think about producing one of my musicals." And I went, "Which one?" And I opened the bag and the libretto of every single musical he'd written was in the bag. And he went, "Pick one." And that was Leslie. And it was everything from the Gershwin that you're talking about now to Broadway fable he'd written called Sunday Dallas, Noah's Ark, It's a Dog's Life, which was his musical about dogs. He was just full of ideas and had an idea every day.
Wow, that's amazing.
He was a wonderful, wonderful man.
Yeah. And like you say, the music is phenomenal. So my next question, Michael, is there a musical which inspired you to make a strong choice in your life? Is there one that you go, oh, if I hadn't seen that musical, this wouldn't have happened, or I'm going to do that this way because that musical taught me to do that?
Well, I think when you talk about, as we were earlier, the education in musicals, that for a long time I thought musicals, as we were saying, were in one way. So when I saw The Producers, I realized that there was a different way, and that was musical comedy. But I do remember seeing Sweeney Todd and again realizing it was different to anything that I'd seen before. And I saw it at quite a young age. It was the national production, Declan Donnellan's brilliant production. Julia Mackenzie as Mrs. Lover. Alan Armstrong was Sweeney. Dennis Quilley was the judge. I mean, it was fantastic. And I often think about that. I often think about that kind of turning point, that if you went to see Scrooge, as I did one week. And then you went to see, and by the way, and I love Scrooge and everything I've said about Leslie and Anthony Newley. I love that. And for me, there's no difference. It's just a different kind of musical theatre, a different kind of entertainment. But I think the effect that Sweeney had on me was in its design, that it came out of I think it actually began in what was the Cottesloe at the National and then moved to the Littleton. And it was a very abstract design. It was incredibly dark. It wasn't a musical where people came out and sang songs in the way we think they do in a musical. I remember being there with my grandparents who I think didn't quite like it because they didn't really get it because it wasn't what they thought a musical was. Yet I think I realised at the time that, this thing that I love, the musical theatre, can be many, many things. And it's not all one thing. This is very dark. I don't know if I understood it all then. I didn't necessarily understand everything that was going on. The judge, Joanna, I was quite young at the time, but it definitely had an effect on me. And I've loved Sondheim all my life. I can appreciate Sondheim very, very much so. But I do feel as though it's had an effect on me, a different effect on me in the way that others have. And that is the great thing about the musical theatre, that it's not one thing. When people say, I hate musicals, I always think, no, you don't, because there are 20 different types. Even within the world of Sondheim, there are 3 or 4 different styles. In the world of Lloyd Webber, there's rock, there's operatic, there's dance, So that really made me think, I really love the theatre. And also seeing Sweeney Todd happened at that time when I was seeing a different piece of theatre every week, and sometimes it was a play. And I realised that fusion of drama and the musical theatre.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that I hate musicals thing is really telling. Mike always says it's like someone going, I hate movies. It's so widespread that people just think it's jazz hands, which is a phrase I detest. Like you say, you don't understand the scope of musicals.
And I think that's what a musical like Sweeney Todd can do. I think that's what you can go off into that world and realise that there are so many sides to this. There are so many different parts and writing can be so different. And that's what Sondheim did. The writing across them all, really, when you think about it, was very, very different. The songs aren't movable. They're very, very specifically written for the shows that they're in, maybe the odd exception. But in the main, they're so focused on those pieces and those characters.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Excellent choice, Michael. Excellent choice. So my next question is, what's the secret to a good musical?
Well, it's probably a cliche for many, and I don't think I always believed this, but I definitely believe it now. It is definitely about the book. It is about the story and engaging an audience. You can't just engage them through music and a good score. There are examples of that. I mean, Cats is an example. We all know that is a collection of poems, and that, in terms of the story, it's not really about the story, but that was a rule breaker because that was about dance at a particular time when we hadn't seen that kind of dancing. We'd seen it in American musicals, but we hadn't seen it in British musicals. And it was the environment of the New London Theatre. You could argue against me and say, well, what about Six, which is a concert? However, it's about characters that we're interested in at a time, again, when people being interested in the Tudors was a big thing. It came along at a time where those songs just worked in that kind of concert setting. But the more and more I work on musicals, I do realise that it is about the story. And many great musicals that where the book hasn't worked have had great scores, and great songs, but they don't live really unless you can have a story that engages an audience and keeps them engaged for 2.5 hours. Why do people love Wicked? People love Wicked because it was a great idea to tell the story of these 2 women that have been staring at us for decades, but now we're going to tell it from a different perspective. It's an absolute genius idea. The man that lives under the Parrots Opera House. Who would have thought? The wife of an Argentinian dictator, Victor Hugo, Les Miserables. These are great, great stories. And without the great stories, I don't think you can hang the score on them. It's not how it works. And the book is very, very hard to get right.
Yeah, it's a very popular answer, that one, the book.
Is it?
Yeah, across pretty much, I would say 90% of the answers to this question are, it's got to have a good story. And I absolutely agree.
I do also think the show coming together, I think that take the Hal Prince mantra or whatever, I do think you need all of the elements in a musical. Everybody needs to be in the room at the same time. I thought that on MJ, which I thought was a fantastic production. But it felt to me that the director, Chris Wheeldon, the designers, everybody was working on the same show. Where sometimes you think, were you not all together making this?
Yeah. Was it done via Zoom?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do think that. MJ was a great example of it all neatly came together.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And I think what I find interesting about you, Michael, is that as a creative, the writers and composers and choreographers and directors, they all talk about collaboration, but you collaborate as a producer as well, don't you? You go in with other producers. You have a relationship with Lloyd Webber, you produce with him. You have kind of co-producing credits as well, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I've produced with lots of people. I mean, Cameron, Andrew, Sonia, Jamie Lloyd, lots of people. But I like producers, and sometimes it is hard to do it on your own. And it takes a little army to come together to make these shows happen.
I think it would surprise people, because I think producers are always sort of seen as the top of the tree, and you don't think that collaboration is as important up there, but it absolutely is.
Yeah, and also, just sharing ideas. We're doing the Jellicle Ball on Broadway this spring, and I couldn't do it on my own from here. And we're doing it with Mike Bosner, who is a great mate and a great producer. I couldn't dream of doing that without him. And there's some things you don't need partners for. Jesus Christ Superstar, Starlight, we didn't have partners. Some shows you do, especially if they're on the other side of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
I always think that's quite important, to have somebody that's on the same time zone as everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think that's really interesting. Collaboration is such an essential part of the art form. And I love that is a part of your life as well. So our final question: which musical feeds your soul?
Well, I'm going to be boring again because I've already said it and I can't separate from what I said before, but it's the Phantom of the Opera.
It is. Okay.
It goes too far back in my past.
Yeah.
It is the show that if somebody said to me, go and watch tonight, go and see any West End show tonight, I would go and see. I think it will be hard to beat it in any of our lifetimes in terms of what it did for the rest of musical theatre. I think it's hugely entertaining, brilliantly produced and put together. I could happily go and watch it 8 times this week, maybe.
I love that. I do think there are those musicals out there that I imagine in your life and your career that sometimes it must, when you're creating so much and you're, working on something for so long, that there are times that you can't see the wood for the trees and you need a bit of a reset. And I imagine that perhaps going to see Phantom might be that for you.
I would never want to produce it either. I mean, I produced a lot of revivals, and a lot of the Lloyd Webber revival. I wouldn't want to produce the Phantom of the Opera. I don't know how you can. That is it. You only do a revival when you think you can do something different with it or something better. How could you do anything better than that? It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. So I'll be very happy for that to sit in the Haymarket down there at His Majesty's for as long as possible and call in every now and again, still get a thrill when that chandelier lifts up and when he appears in the mirror and when they go down to the lair and all of that. It's a terrific piece of work.
They're doing something, aren't they, in New York? It's a version of Phantom, but it's is it an immersive thing?
I haven't seen it yet. You should have gone when you were there. You should have called in. I'm going to see it in a couple of weeks when I go over for the Jellicle. It's an immersive version of the Phantom story told from a very different point of view, but walking around. Everybody that I know that's seen it said it's fantastic.
Yeah, it sounds fabulous. I love the idea of the kind of immersive thing. And that's something that you did so brilliantly with Sunset and Evita with Jamie. The different aspect of those musical productions was so wild and new and exciting and innovative that seems very exciting.
That's not me. That's the genius of Jamie, and what he's done to get people talking about musicals is brilliant. He's managed to grab headlines all over the place for taking those shows and not reviving them but reinventing them.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it, when musicals become cool again, because we don't feel quite so geeky, Michael.
Yeah, well, that's true. When you hear people on the street are talking about musicals, it's terrific.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. So I did lie, because there is a little extra question at the end, and that's just, what are you up to next? Is there anything you can tell us about that's coming up for you?
Yeah, well, we're busy. We workshop and preview this terrific new musical, not for kids, but that is aimed at people that are interested in doing Shakespeare at school, called Weird, which is in rehearsal now. Then we go to New York to do the Jellicle Ball, which is the first 2 versions of Cats this year. Jellicle Ball on Broadway, and then Drew McConey's new version at Regent's Park, which then tours the UK. In the middle of that, we do Jesus Christ Superstar at the London Palladium Palladium with Sound Rider. At the same time, Miss Saigon's on tour. Starlight's at Wembley. Titanic is at the Criterion. And now we're planning what we're doing next year and into 28. So it's all pretty busy, and the small matter of 23 pantomimes this Christmas, including the 11th year at the Palladium.
Wow, incredible. It's inspiring talking to you. It really is, to sort of see the gumption and the drive that you have. It makes me want to kind of get up and do something myself, Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today,
No,
Michael.
thank you so much.
Well, I've absolutely loved it. Oh, Michael, amazing.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah, it was brilliant. I could talk to you for another 2 hours, but I know you have important things to do. Thank you so much for listening today. This has been Talk Musicals to Me for the Bloop Network. My fabulous producer is Aaron Ware, and the music you heard is from the pen of the sublime Tom Self. If you get a moment, please subscribe or follow and rate the podcast by clicking the stars below on the podcast page. It takes about 2 seconds to do, and it will really help the podcast and its future life, and would make us massively, eternally, enormously grateful. In the meantime, another huge thanks for tuning in, and please do so again next time to see who will be next up to Talk Musicals to Me.